First contact. The sun was slowly sinking behind the rust-colored hills surrounding Catera city. The air was dry, laced with dust and that strange flavor of hope, the kind of hope that always clung to settlements like this. Between freshly paved streets, improvised shacks, and shipping containers converted into homes, people bustled about like busy ants. The place was young, vibrant, and full of life. Barely 3 years had passed since the first veins of gold had been discovered deep beneath the soil, and where there's gold, people always follow. Just like Nara and Joran. The two had only moved into their modest new home 2 days ago, little more than a 2-room living container. Nara stood at the window, her eyes locked onto the nearby construction sites, where heavy machinery dug deep, laying the foundations for the next wave of makeshift housing. I told you, Joran, this place is gonna be something. You can feel it in the air. It's the start of something new for us. Joran didn't answer immediately. He was kneeling in front of a half-unpacked suitcase, the fabric still clinging to the faint scent of their old life. Or it's the beginning of the end, he muttered, his voice heavy with skepticism, his expression anything but hopeful. Nara turned, placing her hands on her hips as she fixed him with a determined stare. You don't really want to spend the rest of your life stuck in some dead-end warehouse job, do you? Here, there's gold right beneath our feet, Joran. Gold! We could afford a real house, a proper one. Maybe even start a family. And you'd rather settle for shift work? Joran slowly looked up, meeting her gaze. You call it gold beneath our feet. I call it a graveyard for people like us. Just look around, Nara. See those crumbling shacks? They're all that's left of folks who had no luck or no talent, and I'm the kind of guy who has neither. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant hum of drilling machines gnawing at the earth somewhere far away. With a soft sigh, Nara walked past him to the door and stepped out onto the tiny veranda. You're being way too pessimistic again, and if this whole adventure really falls apart, we can always pack up and crash at my parents' place for a while. Your parents? Joran grimaced. That'd be even worse. Nara was about to fire back, but something stopped her. An odd sensation prickled at her skin. The sky looked strange. The colors seemed off, like a poorly tuned screen. And right above the city, a faint shimmer flickered through the air. She narrowed her eyes. Joran, do you see that too? Or am I just imagining things? He stepped outside and followed her gaze. For a moment he said nothing, then slowly shook his head. Could be an optical illusion, or maybe some kind of interference field. But it was more than that. By now, the neighbors had noticed it too. Conversations on the streets died away. Merchants abandoned their crates mid-sale. Children froze in place as if some unseen force had turned them to stone. A sharp hiss, followed by a deep, bone-shaking rumble, suddenly tore through the air. Not like thunder. This was something else. A vibration so low it wasn't just heard, but felt, crawling straight into the chest, making every rib hum. And then it appeared. A tear. A glowing, pulsating slit slicing through the sky, widening slowly and unnaturally. A rift, alien and impossible, shining like a wound against the darkening horizon, its size overwhelming. And behind it, movement. A colossal silhouette, vague and blurred, shifting within the fog of some unknown, otherworldly dimension. Joran's instincts kicked in. He reached for Nara's hand, gripping it tight. Shit! This place is cursed, I swear! We've got to get out of here now, while we still can. Nara's fingers clung to his. This has to be normal. Maybe it's some kind of experiment, or... But the words died on her lips. Something moved within the light. Something massive. From the glowing rift, an enormous shape pushed through, the body of an alien being. Towering, clearly feminine in outline, but with features so strange, so utterly foreign, that her very presence twisted the air around her. The ground quaked under the creature's first step. Joran's voice cracked with disbelief. Girl? An alien girl? She's huge! Nara's eyes widened as the creature stepped fully into view, the portal closing behind her with a final silent flicker. The towering girl now stood above the city like a living monument. Slender, impossibly tall, with long greenish hair streaked with pale white, shimmering softly in the dim light. Her body was wrapped in a sleek, metallic suit, tight as armor, smooth as liquid steel. A girl? Nara snapped, her voice sharp and brittle. That's no girl. That's a damn monster. She tightened her grip on Joran's hand. "You're right. We have to run. Now." Plus, they ran. No second thoughts. No looking back. Everything they'd brought with them, the suitcase, the clothes, the hope for a new beginning, all left behind. None of it mattered anymore. The sky above them had turned a sickly past blood-red hue, as if the creature's arrival had poisoned the world itself. The ground pulsed beneath their feet, each tremor heavier than the last, growing more violent with every heartbeat. The monster was moving, relentless, inevitable. The dull, rhythmic boom of its footsteps echoed through the entire settlement, shaking walls and rattling windows. Cars bounced on their suspensions like toys, glass shattered, and people were thrown off their feet by the invisible shockwaves. Shit! Shit! This isn't a dream. This is real. Joran gasped between heavy breaths, legs burning as they sprinted along the cracked sidewalks. The car. The damn car. Still too far. Why was it always the important stuff that ended up in the worst possible place? Then, sharp cracks in the air. Gunfire. First a few isolated shots, then a wild, panicked hail of bullets. Screams echoed through the streets, engines roared to life, car doors slammed. A handful of local sheriffs and some desperate, armed residents had set up a hopeless defense, rifles aimed skyward at the towering nightmare. Nara yanked Joran behind a rusted freight container, pressing her back to the cold metal, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She barely dared to breathe. Carefully, with trembling fingers, she edged toward the corner and peeked out. There she stood. The girl, if you could even call her that, looming over the city's edge like some living titan. Taller than every building, feet larger than entire trucks. No, several trucks at once. A being so vast, so utterly beyond their world, it made the entire town feel like a model set waiting to be crushed. Her sheer size shattered every concept the human mind could possibly comprehend. The sleek metallic suit clung to her like the armored skin of some alien titan, glistening in the eerie red twilight, while strands of her greenish-white hair floated lazily in the rising wind. But the strangest thing wasn't her size. It was her face. There was no malice, no hatred twisting her features. Instead, her expression looked curious, almost cautious, maybe even nervous. Or was it something else? Nara couldn't tell, and there was no time to figure it out. The people around her had long abandoned reason. Panic had taken over. Instinct ruled. And so they opened fire. Useless. The bullets pinged off her body like raindrops on steel. No damage. No reaction. Not even a flinch. The giant girl tilted her head slightly, as if studying the scurrying, frantic creatures beneath her feet. And then, slow, deliberate, almost playful, she raised one of her colossal feet. Nara's breath caught. The people below her scattered, screaming, as the massive shadow darkened the street. And then, with a single, unhurried step, the Titan girl lowered her foot, and the armed group vanished beneath the vast expanse of her soul as if they'd never existed. Crunch! Crack! Boom! The impact shook the ground harder than anything before. The shockwave hit Nara and Joran like a sledgehammer, ripping their legs out from under them and slamming them onto the dusty pavement. Joran gasped, unable to form words. Nara felt tears stinging her eyes. Not grief. Pure, unfiltered terror. This can't be real. She whispered hoarsely. She just crushed them, like they were nothing. But deep down, both of them knew this was as real as it gets. They scrambled back onto their feet, hands clutching one another, and ran. Ran as fast as their legs could carry them, lungs burning, hearts hammering. The car, the damn car. It was their only shot, their only hope. But they weren't alone. Dozens of others were running too, all headed for the central parking garage. And then the sky exploded. A blinding turquoise flash split the air, followed by a sharp, thunderous blast. The parking garage disintegrated in an instant. Concrete, steel, and glass erupted into the sky, flung hundreds of meters through the air like scraps of paper. Debris rained down like jagged shrapnel. People dove for cover. Others weren't fast enough, buried alive beneath the falling rubble. The garage was gone, and with it, every single car. Their last hope erased in seconds. As the dust began to clear, they saw her. The giant girl stood there, towering over the ruins, her arm lowered, a sleek blaster still glowing faintly, the weapon seemingly fused into the massive metallic bracelet wrapped around her wrist. It looked like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. But this wasn't fiction. This was a living nightmare. And around them, the world collapsed into chaos. People ran in every direction, blind with panic, shoving, stumbling, trampling each other in raw desperation. The remaining cars tore wildly through the streets, crashing into buildings, flipping over, slamming into each other like toys. And then, another footstep, a single earth-shattering impact. The ground roared as if the world itself was splitting apart beneath her unstoppable, merciless stride. The sky had shifted into a ghostly shade of violet, with smoke from the destroyed parking garage rising like a black pillar into the heavens. Nara no longer knew what she was doing, or where she was supposed to go. Her instincts, the fear, had long since taken over. But fear was a terrible guide, as the chaotic, desperate mob around her made painfully clear, running like headless chickens through the streets, colliding and trampling one another. Plus, Nara and Joran ran, stumbled, staggered. Every step felt heavier than the last. The air burned in their lungs as the world around them drowned in utter chaos. People screamed, called out for loved ones, tripped over one another, lost their shoes, were shoved to the ground. Cars barreled aimlessly through the streets, engines roaring, metal smashing into metal. A jeep sped past them, missing by mere inches. Nara felt the rush of hot air and the screech of tires as the vehicle crashed headfirst into a utility pole, which splintered and came crashing down. Joran was shoved by a panicked man, flailing his arms wildly as he ran for his life. He staggered back, and Nara grabbed his arm, pulling him back onto his feet. But where were they even running to? It felt as though the city itself had trapped them in a merciless nightmare. And the trembling from those footsteps grew stronger and stronger. They barely dared to lift their heads. But they had to. The giant girl was now fully on the move, stomping through the city with slow, deliberate, yet utterly devastating steps. Everything was flattened. Cars, people, men, women, children, no one was spared. Some tried desperately to flee, others stood frozen, paralyzed in the face of approaching annihilation. But the girl kept walking, crushing everyone beneath her feet, squashing them like bugs. Sometimes it almost seemed as if she slowed down on purpose, curiously observing the screaming crowds below. Nara and Joran's hearts nearly stopped. They ran, stumbled again, fought against their exhaustion, as the girl came closer and closer. The shadow of her colossal body fell over the street, and once more, that deep, thunderous impact. Right in front of their eyes, 5 or 6 people were caught under her massive foot and ruthlessly crushed in a single, casual step. There was no escape, no more time. Nara screamed, Joran froze like a statue. The next step was meant for them. Slowly, the giant girl lifted her foot. Her enormous, bare soul hovered above them. It was a sight that paralyzed the mind. Alien, powerful, breathtakingly beautiful, and nightmarishly terrifying all at once. The shadow swallowed Nara and Joran completely, while the girl's glowing eyes fixed on them. Nara screamed. A desperate, panicked scream that echoed off the walls of the surrounding buildings. Please, don't kill us. Please let us live. I'm begging you. We just wanted to build a new life here. All we wanted was to find a little happiness. Please, please let us live. Please. The heel of the enormous foot came down with a deep, dull thud, crushing an old man beneath it who hadn't managed to get away in time. But the toes didn't lower any further. They remained suspended, hovering just above the terrified couple's heads. The towering figure stood still, the girl's glowing, oversized eyes studying the 2 tiny, trembling humans on the ground with a peculiar, almost thoughtful curiosity. It was as if she was weighing a decision. Something about what Nara had just said seemed to spark a moment of hesitation in the giantess, as if her words had planted a thought in that colossal mind. A faint humming sound, coming from the greenhouse's lighting system, filled the air. The atmosphere was warm and humid, while beyond the thick glass dome, a bleak and lifeless landscape stretched out before her. Black, cooled lava rock sprawled to the horizon, interrupted only by glowing cracks where sluggish, viscous lava streams crawled lazily through the fissures. This planet, Vulcano, almost resembled hell itself, and Vara had been living here for years. She stood in the middle of the carefully arranged rows of plants. Her dark purple skin glistened softly in the muted light, and the smooth axolotl gills on her cheeks twitched with every breath. She was small, smaller than any other Larcomnian living here, something that had always bothered her. Beside her, an older blonde axolotl woman with pale blue skin, at least a head taller, was busy refilling watering cans and checking sensor readouts. Every now and then, she cast a sideways glance at Vara, though without much interest. "Quite a lot to do, huh?" the woman mumbled casually, not looking up from her work. "But it's one of the most important jobs here. After all, we're trying to build a new life. Something that lasts." Vara nodded silently. Something about those words triggered a strange sense of déjà vu. She was sure she had never heard them before, yet they felt oddly familiar. She knew the theory behind time-shifted déjà vu, but still, this moment stood out in an unsettling way, leaving goosebumps crawling across her skin. A fleeting wave of foreboding drifted into her chest, cold and heavy, a dull melancholy that lingered like the chill of a forgotten memory. She turned her gaze back to the bleak landscape, watching plumes of smoke rising from the active volcanoes in the distance. Vulcano was endlessly barren, desolate. "Sometimes I wonder if we could live somewhere else," she murmured more to herself than anyone else. But her coworker didn't really respond. Vara could feel it. The disinterest. No one here truly wanted to be her friend. No one wanted to get close to her. Not really. A faint skittering sound pulled her attention downward. On the ground, a small dark insect was slowly creeping toward one of the plants. She felt the creature's curiosity, its primal need to feed. But before she could speak, her coworker's barefoot came down hard on the little creature. "Crunch! You've got to squash these things on sight. Can't risk them infesting the crops," the woman explained matter-of-factly, wiping the crushed remains off her sole on a nearby stone as if it were the most natural thing in the world. But Vara barely heard her words. She had felt it, in that tiny fraction of a moment, the fear of that little insect, the sheer, pure panic as the shadow of the foot fell over it, the rush of wind, the impact, the crushing pressure, the mortal terror, and the instant it all ended. Her heart raced, a strange thrill coursing through her. "What? Are you even listening to me?" The woman's voice broke through Vara's thoughts. Vara flinched slightly, her mind still lingering on the crushed insect. Yeah, sure. The bugs shouldn't damage the crops. I know." The woman shot her a sharp look. "Then, why were you staring at my feet like that?" Vara felt caught off guard. Nothing. I was just thinking about what the bug must have felt, you know, when it got squashed under your foot." Her coworker raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. "Vara, sometimes you're really odd, you know that? You should focus more on becoming a productive member of the colony. I do appreciate your work here, but there's still so much more to do in other places too. You know, survival isn't easy here. We all have to do our part." Vara nodded quietly and returned to her work. She had just turned 19, and everyone expected her to take on more responsibility. But the truth was, she had no idea where she belonged. She didn't care about the colony, and this life disgusted her. Why should she put more effort into something she had no passion for? Especially when the work was so dull and repetitive? Later, when her shift finally ended, Vara wandered slowly through the settlement, heading home. The sun had already disappeared behind the jagged black hills of hardened lava, leaving the world bathed in shadows, save for the distant, glowing red of molten lava streams snaking through the landscape. When she reached home, she removed her breathing mask and closed the door behind her, greeted by the familiar sounds of soft keystrokes and the rhythmic beeping of sensors. Her father sat, as he often did, in front of his massive display, a patchwork of satellite images, radio signal readouts, and distant world recordings flickering across the monitors. He was a serious man, marked by the traces of many years, his shoulders burdened with the weight of endless concerns. "Busy?" Vara asked softly, leaning against the doorframe. "As always," he muttered, his eyes locked on the data. "There are many worlds out there, you know." Vara sighed. "I know, Dad, but they'll still be there tomorrow. Besides, you've said it yourself, most of those civilizations haven't even developed space travel. So maybe you could take a break and join me for dinner? I'd really like to talk for once." "Sorry, sweetheart. I really can't tonight. There are some strange readings just a few systems away. I need to monitor them, make sure they don't turn into a threat." Vara rolled her eyes, already tired of hearing the same excuse. Why do we always just watch and listen from afar? Why not actually visit one of these worlds? Make contact. Talk to the people there. Her father turned to her with a genuine laugh. You're so wonderfully naive, sweetheart. Do you have any idea how enormous we Larcomnians are compared to most other species? We're among the largest life forms in the known universe. We can't just show up on another world and say hi. We'd scare the living daylights out of them. And rightfully so. Just by existing at our size, we could cause massive destruction. Vara hesitated. But we could be careful. And I'm smaller than most. Maybe I could. Her father shook his head. No, even you are gigantic by their standards. You'd have to be extremely careful not to accidentally crush someone under your feet. It's just too dangerous. Vara's thoughts drifted back to the insect in the greenhouse. She shuddered. Really? I'd be that big? She paused, trying to picture it. I've heard that before, but it's hard to imagine. It's such a strange thought. Her father turned back to his work, dismissively adding, "There's an old saying, a giant who lives among giants never realizes that he's a giant." Vara let out a soft sigh as she shuffled away. Just as she was about to leave, her father called after her. "Oh, by the way, Vara, if you're making yourself something to eat, could you bring me something too? I really don't have time to cook." Vara nodded silently and headed to the small kitchen of their modest home. She grabbed some of the fruit from the botanical garden and prepared a fresh salad for two. She placed a bowl next to her father, but he didn't even glance at her, completely absorbed in his work. Vara sat down in her small, dimly lit room, a large bowl of salad resting in her lap. The walls were made of rough stone, mixed with concrete and reinforced with thick steel beams, some of which had corroded or were gnawed away by rust. Thick pipes wound along the walls, wrapped in clouds of swirling steam, and brass-colored gauges, gears, and mechanical valves were scattered throughout the space. A weak, flickering light from a bare bulb hanging from the ceiling barely illuminated the room. It looked exactly like the quarters of a scientist. Fitting, considering it had once belonged to her father. But honestly, it suited her just as well. She had always been passionate about tech and loved tinkering with things. As she ate the plain but fresh salad, her gaze wandered toward her protective suit hanging neatly on the wall. Every resident of this harsh world had one. The atmosphere outside the domes was far too hostile, and the frequent energy storms and volcanic eruptions made it a necessity. But Vara's suit was different. She had upgraded it herself, turning it into something more than just a shield. A jetpack was mounted on the back, equipped with small thrusters that allowed her to fly for short bursts. Her left arm bracer held the barrel of an arm blaster, outfitted with an energy weapon and a mining laser, just in case she needed to gather minerals during her expeditions. Attached to her belt was a spherical portal emitter, pulsing softly with light, signaling that it was fully functional and ready for action. Ready for adventure. She had found all this tech buried deep in her father's old data archives, the last remnants of Zolia, a long-lost, highly advanced civilization. Apparently, no one on her planet had ever thought to develop or even make use of this technology. No one but her. Why would they? None of them had ever felt the urge to leave this desolate rock behind. But she was different. She wanted more. For months now, she had barely felt anything. Her emotions had gone numb, dulled, like they were frozen beneath layers of sadness, loneliness, and routine. She longed for adventure, for something that would make her heart race again. Maybe, she thought, she could even do something good out there. Reach out to other species, negotiate, trade goods, forge friendships. With a quiet sigh, she grabbed her tablet and flicked through the endless lists of shortages plaguing the colonies. Water, as always, was running low. Even with filters and recycling systems squeezing out every last drop, it was never enough. Ironically, Larconians needed more water than most species, thanks to their size and the fact that as amphibians they had to soak in water for long periods every day. But it wasn't just water. Metals, spare parts, even basic electronics were in short supply. Especially Lorcani, the computer specialist from the neighboring colony, had been raising the alarm for weeks now. Without gold, it was impossible to produce stable circuit boards. And gold was about as rare on this planet as dreamers. And then Vara remembered something. Just a few days ago, she had seen coordinates flash across her father's old monitor. Quickly, she opened the archives on her tablet. There it was, a newly discovered planet, a few light years away but well within the range of her portal emitter. The data suggested rich gold deposits, but the world wasn't uninhabited. The files revealed that a humanoid civilization lived there, a species just barely crawling into its industrial age. They had no modern computers, no wireless communication, not even satellites. Vara set the tablet aside and stared at the ceiling, lost in thought. A foreign world with a foreign culture. Maybe it was time to head there. It sounded crazy, but maybe that was exactly what she needed. Her eyes drifted to a small framed photo resting beside her bed. Her mother smiled back at her from the picture, a rather petite but strong axolotl woman with warm, kind eyes. She had died during the attack on their homeworld. Only her father had managed to save Vara, whisking her away through a portal, along with a small group of survivors. Since that day, they had lost all contact with the rest of the Larkonians, never knowing if there were others still alive. They had wandered from world to world, never able to stay for long. Until they finally got stranded here, on this barren, merciless rock, cut off from everything. Vara picked up the photo, her fingers softly brushing against the glass. If you were still here, we could talk, or explore the stars together. I bet you would have loved that just as much as I would, right? A lump formed in her throat. She wanted to cry, but the tears just wouldn't come. Her soul felt too numb, too empty. The last time she had actually felt something, truly felt, had been that strange moment when she sensed the emotions of that tiny bug, the one her colleague had carelessly crushed under her enormous foot. It was ironic in a way. Her empathy was so strong that she could feel the emotions of others like they were her own, even the tiniest creatures. But when it came to her own heart, she felt nothing. Larkonians were naturally a telepathic species, highly attuned to the feelings of others. But Vara's gift had always been unusually strong. She could literally feel everything others felt, even the emotions of insects, that little helpless creature, and for a brief moment, she had felt what it was like to experience fear, desperation. But feeling something, even something so painful, was still better than feeling nothing at all. In fact, she had almost enjoyed the moment. It had felt strangely comforting, as if she herself had been the one crushed under her colleague's careless foot. What a beautiful way to die, she thought. Just squashed, and all the worries and all the dark thoughts would simply vanish in an instant. But she caught herself. Her thoughts were spiraling too deep into the dark again. Her mother would have wanted her to live a good life, to enjoy it, and to go on adventures. Slowly, she placed the picture back on the table and straightened up. Her decision was made. Tonight, when everyone else was asleep, she would leave, visit that strange world, finally live again, finally an adventure. Once the last bit of salad was gone, Vara stood up, wiped her mouth, and leaned over her suit. Carefully, she checked the energy supply and made sure everything was in working order. Everything was ready. And yet, her heart was pounding faster than usual. She lay down in bed, but sleep was impossible. Her mind was too full, her thoughts racing. Again and again, she imagined what it would be like to meet alien creatures. Tiny beings in another world, maybe friendly, maybe hostile, but most importantly, real, alive. A real adventure was waiting for her. No more endless gray routines, no more cold emptiness. The hours passed slowly. Then she heard her father stop working and go to sleep. The habitat fell silent. Vara sat up and took a deep breath. Now or never. She quietly got up, put on her suit, strapped on the jetpack, and attached the breathing mask. As she opened the door, the hot air hit her immediately, thick, sulfurous, with a metallic taste. The sky glowed reddish from rising fumes, and somewhere, a distant geyser roared. The atmosphere was made up of sulfur dioxide, methane, and traces of chlorine, deadly for most species, including her without protection. Vara walked for a while, jumped over broken rock slabs, avoided bubbling cracks, until no one could see her anymore, and the faint lights of the colony were just tiny dots on the horizon. Then, she pulled the small module from her belt, nervously activated the portal emitter, and before her, a shimmering tear opened in the air, slowly becoming a circular window into a strange world. Hesitantly, she stepped closer. Behind the portal was a different landscape, greenish-yellow and alive, so foreign yet so inviting. Nervously, she took a deep breath, gathered her courage, and stepped through. Her adventure had begun. This was the moment she had waited for so long. But the instant she set foot on the foreign ground, a shock rushed through her. No fear or surprise at the new world, no, a flood of emotions, so intense she nearly lost her balance. Fear, shock, panic, overwhelm. Not her own emotions, but others. Eyes wide open, she looked around. She could see a city, tiny, buildings barely bigger than her hand, vehicles like little bugs, and tiny beings either staring at her or fleeing in all directions, overwhelmed by raw, pure terror. Vara froze. She had suspected she'd be big here. But this was incredible. She was truly a towering giantess, and these beings were terrified of her. She could feel it so clearly, so powerfully, it drowned out everything else within her. All she felt was fear, dread, panic, hatred, horror. Some saw her as a monster, a walking catastrophe that had to be stopped. Her mere presence seemed to shake their world to its core. And this wave of fear that surged through her like an echo, it was so real, so alive, it nearly took her breath away. And yet, strangely, it was almost intoxicating, exhilarating. This must be what a real adventure feels like, she thought, as her gaze slowly swept across the little city. But she didn't just want to stand there. She wanted to speak, to explain that she hadn't come to hurt them, but to negotiate. She needed gold, desperately, but she would have been willing to trade knowledge or technology in return. Her own species was far ahead of these humans, after all. Slowly, deliberately, she took her first steps, the ground trembling beneath her massive feet with every movement. The scanner in her suit had indicated about 5,000 people lived in this tiny town, and the closer she came, the more clearly she felt the flood of emotions radiating from them. She removed her breathing mask. The air was surprisingly fresh and clear, perfect for breathing, yet she could hardly breathe at all. The sheer weight of the collective fear pressed down on her chest like something invisible trying to crush her. Her heart was pounding so fast she thought it might burst at any moment. With every step closer, the chaos in the city intensified. Sirens wailed, tiny cars tried to flee, people were running for their lives. And deep inside her, a thought began to grow, one she barely dared to admit. Somehow, she thought it was cool. But slowly, something shifted in the wave of emotions surrounding her. Amid all the panic, she suddenly felt something else. Hatred. Determination. Some of these tiny beings were actually thinking about attacking her. They wanted to stop her, kill her. Vara swallowed hard, her heart tightening. Why? Why would they do that? She hadn't even said a single word yet, hadn't touched a single building. She hadn't harmed anyone. Then she saw small, glowing projectiles, gunfire. Some of the armed humans had gathered and opened fire on her. The shots bounced harmlessly off her suit like tiny raindrops. Even on the few places where her skin wasn't covered by the suit, the weapons caused little more than a soft tickle. A cold shiver crept down her spine. She felt disgust. These small, pitiful creatures actually believed they could hurt her. Their arrogance was revolting. Almost annoyed, she raised her foot, slowly, like in slow motion, above the tiny attackers. For a moment she hesitated, but then the thought of that bug her colleague had crushed flashed through her mind. Instinctively, she stomped down. A dull, short sound. Beneath her enormous soul, the little bodies instantly became bloody, shapeless smears. The emotions of the attackers had shifted at the last moment from hatred to pure terror, and then there was nothing left. No more feelings. They were gone, erased from existence, just because she had stepped. Slowly, she lifted her foot again, her eyes curiously studying the crushed remains sticking to her soul. A strange sensation spread through her. It had been so easy, and it had felt good. Too good. But the moment didn't last long. A few of the tiny attackers had survived and were running for their lives. Eyes gleaming, adrenaline rushing through her veins, she set herself in motion. Her steps once again made the ground quake as she curiously and excitedly stomped after the fleeing humans. Her massive feet sent tremors through the earth with every step, striking sheer terror into the hearts of the people. Some of the tiny figures still desperately fired at her, little projectiles from their weapons that felt like nothing more than insect bites against her skin. But she didn't care anymore. Without much effort, she stomped them flat, one by one. Even other fleeing people who simply got in her way, men, women, children, it didn't matter who, it didn't matter where. Some were crushed beneath her souls the very moment they crossed the street at the wrong time. Others were deliberately hunted down by her feet as they tried to escape in panic. Even cars turned into nothing but flattened, mangled scraps of metal once they got caught under her feet. With every life crushed, the rush inside her grew stronger, a high fueled by pure power. Her senses soaked up the fear and panic of the tiny humans like sweet nectar. And then, she felt it even more intensely, the exact moment when a human was trapped beneath her soul. She could feel it as if it were part of her own body, how they were pressed into the soft flesh of her foot, how the pressure steadily rose until their skeletons snapped, their bodies pulped, their lives fading away beneath her. It was intoxicating. She slowed her pace. She wanted to savor this feeling, to stretch out every single moment, to prolong every desperate heartbeat her victim still felt before being crushed by her. It was an almost intimate connection she built with each tiny human just seconds before her foot pressed them flat. And she wanted more, always more. With a cold, almost greedy smile, she stepped from one victim to the next, leaving nothing behind but masses of crushed humans under her soles, not sparing even a single thought about what she was actually doing. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something. The crowds were running in one direction, streaming toward a single building, from which dozens of vehicles were rolling out. Her sensors confirmed her suspicion. A parking garage. Without thinking, she raised her blaster and fired. A blinding energy beam sliced through the air, and in the next instant, the building exploded with a deafening roar. Flaming chunks of debris and twisted metal rained from the sky as dense black smoke coiled upward into the blue. The humans at her feet were now utterly devastated, drowning in despair, a despair that vibrated through her like a dark, haunting melody. For a moment, she stood still. Why had she done that? Why had she taken away their only escape route? Did she want to stop them, trap them, crush them all? Was that what she really wanted? She knew the answer. Negotiations were long off the table. She could see it in the feelings of the people. They saw her as a monster. And she wanted to become exactly that. She wanted to make their nightmares come true. She would crush them all, one by one, until nothing but pulped, bloody remains were left in her colossal footprints. Step by step, she kept moving. Her mighty feet came down mercilessly on more and more people, crushing them beneath her, while here and there even buildings crumbled under the weight of her devastating steps. Just as she was about to lift her foot again, a voice reached her. A desperate high-pitched scream. "Please, don't kill us! Please, let us live! I'm begging you. We just wanted to start a new life here. Please, please, let us live, please." Vara froze. That sentence, a cold shiver ran down her spine, that déjà vu from just a few hours earlier. Her colleague had spoken those exact words. "We want to build a new life here." And now, here it was again. Spoken by one of the very people she was crushing underfoot. It almost felt as if she had sensed this moment coming, like some dark premonition. For a moment, Vara hesitated. Should she spare the woman? She was the first one who had dared to speak directly to her. Her thoughts were racing. She weighed her options. For a second, she was ready to give in, to hold back, to not be the monster. But then, her decision was made. Slowly, she lowered her foot again. The massive soul descended menacingly onto the two tiny humans, Nara and Joran, who were desperately trying to crawl away, scrambling for safety. But her descending skin soon caught up with them, and her weight pressed them down, little by little, squishing their bodies against the cold, unyielding ground. Nara clung tightly to Joran's hand, her voice breaking, soaked in despair. "I'm sorry for what I said. I love you. I love you so much. I wanted to be happy with you here." Vara paused. She could feel it, that raw, genuine emotion, the deep love flaring up between the two in their final seconds. It was beautiful, intense, something she herself had longed for but had been missing for far too long. She allowed them the moment, let them lock eyes one last time, to share a final kiss, to whisper their love. And then her foot lowered further, slowly, mercilessly. She felt their tiny bodies yield beneath her soul, bones snapping, hearts breaking, their last burst of pain and fear pulsing through her senses. An intense, deeply satisfying feeling washed over her. It was the best thing she had ever felt. She had experienced it so vividly. What a crazy, overwhelming sensation it must have been, being pressed into the soft flesh of her soul, feeling every ridge of her skin, the warmth, the crushing, unforgiving pressure. That overwhelming power. and of course, the sheer terror. It almost felt as if she herself had lived through it, to be crushed under her own bare foot, mashed into nothingness beneath her. Vara's heart was pounding, hammering wildly in her chest, and she loved it. She wanted more. Leisurely, she moved through the increasingly devastated small town. Her gaze wandered from the crushed remains beneath her feet to the smoking ruins in the distance. But this feeling inside her, this thirst for even more emotions, was far from satisfied. Curiously, she raised her blaster once again, aimed at a block of multi-story buildings, and fired. The beam sliced effortlessly through concrete, steel, and glass, collapsing entire building complexes as if they had been made from sand. The heavy thud of the falling debris briefly drowned out the panicked screams of the people. But she could still hear them. She could feel them in her mind, that raw, naked fear, and it only made her smile. With a satisfied grin, she planted her foot onto the remains of a half-destroyed apartment building. Her toes curled slightly into the rubble as she slowly shifted her weight, grinding the last survivors trapped inside, until everything and everyone beneath her was reduced to flattened, broken remains. Suddenly, she felt it again, those tiny projectiles bouncing harmlessly off her skin. When she turned her head, her eyes locked onto a small flying machine. A helicopter. Instinctively, she stretched out her hand, caught the fragile little craft between her fingers, and squeezed. The metal shell crumpled like paper, the human cargo inside reduced to paste in an instant. So easy. All too easy. She continued her rampage, walking with slow, deliberate power through the ruined streets. Sometimes she stomped down fast and hard, delighting in the way entire groups of people were reduced to bloody pulp beneath a single crushing step. Other times, she slowed her pace, lowering her foot with meticulous precision onto individual humans, feeling their tiny bodies being squashed into formless mush beneath her massive, warm soul. Each one of them sent her an intoxicating wave of raw panic and sharp, final pain, a sensation sweeter than any drug. But then, as she was casually grinding another cluster of vehicles underfoot, her gaze fell upon a small group of people. They had just emerged from a shattered building, one they had used as a hiding place, but now they stood frozen in sheer deathly fear, as Vara's shadow loomed over them. With a smooth, almost elegant motion, she bent down. Her enormous fingers closed around the squirming, fragile figures and lifted them carefully into the air. She opened her palm, studying the tiny humans with her huge purple glowing eyes. Their little bodies flailed, screamed, begged, and through the pounding terror in their minds, she felt every last thought, every desperate heartbeat, fighting against the certainty of their fate. And then, something new. A flicker of hope buried under the fear. They believed she was going to eat them. Vara could feel it. The thought tickled her mind, intrigued her. She had never done it before, never even considered it. But now? Now she wanted to know. She wanted to feel it. Slowly, she opened her enormous mouth and tilted her hand, letting the screaming, helpless figures tumble onto her warm, wet tongue. Some immediately tried to scramble past her teeth, slipping on the slick surface, tumbling back again and again. Others pounded their tiny fists against her tongue or clung to the soft living wall in panic. But none of it mattered. Vara simply let herself feel it all. Every slip, every flinch, every desperate heartbeat, and she relished every second. She closed her maw. Her tongue toyed with the writhing people, pushing a few against her cheeks, savoring the salty mixture of sweat, blood, and pure fear. And then, without hesitation, she bit down. Bones cracked like twigs. Warm liquid flooded her mouth, and the dying sensations of her victims surged through her body, the high growing deeper and more intense with every second. Some of the others she let slide slowly down her throat, feeling them disappear into the tight darkness of her gullet, where their final strength faded away and their lives ended inside her. Never before had she imagined her own body like this. Never before had she realized how it could feel. This strange, intoxicating blend of power and connection. She licked her lips clean and let her gaze wander once more across the shattered remains of the town. The flattened rubble, the twisted wrecks, the few surviving humans, staggering, barely able to run. She could feel their despair, a deep, hopeless surrender, vibrating through her mind like a dark, haunting melody. And right in that moment, the truth finally settled deep into her core. This extreme power, this absolute control. It was hers, simply because she was a Larkonian. Her body, her size, her strength. It was her birthright, her destiny. A cold, confident smile curled over her lips as she took her next step, pressing another dozen people flat beneath her gigantic soul. She knew each of them had been unique, irreplaceable lives, with thoughts, emotions, families, but none of it mattered. Vara wanted to feel exactly how all of that ended beneath her feet. She stood tall amidst the smoking ruins of the tiny town, her purple glowing eyes lazily drifting over the devastated streets. Only a handful of buildings still clung to their broken shapes. And the humans? Scattered fragments of what once had been a community. Maybe 50 survivors, 100 at most. Her gaze sharpened. It was time to end this. A playful grin tugged at the corner of her lips as she activated her jetpack. The thrusters came to life, purple flames roaring from the nozzles, and she rose silently, higher and higher into the air. 200 meters. 400. A little more. And then she cut the engines. Vara let herself fall. Her massive body dropped like a stone, the wind howling past her limbs, the ground rushing toward her, until she slammed into it with her full, unstoppable weight. The impact unleashed a violent shockwave that radiated outward from her feet like a living thing. The few buildings still standing were shredded, reduced to fine concrete dust and twisted shards of steel. Windows burst, walls cracked and crumbled. Those few humans still alive, desperately clinging to life, were ripped apart, their bodies crushed like bugs in the fury of a hurricane. And then silence. Only the faint crackle of burning wreckage whispered through the air like the last breath of the town. Vara straightened, her feet planted deep into the shattered asphalt. She paused. She felt it, even before her eyes confirmed it. One last heartbeat. One last human. A man. Pinned beneath a slab of concrete, legs crushed, body trembling. His eyes locked on her towering form. He couldn't run. He couldn't fight. He could only watch. Vara took a step forward, then another. Each slow, heavy footfall sent tremors through the ground, and the man flinched, knowing full well there was no escape. She stopped in front of him. Savoring the moment, she raised her foot, spread her toes slightly, and then ever so slowly she lowered only her big toe onto him, pressing down gently at first, like a teasing, deliberate caress. A soft crack, a wet, dull squish. Vara closed her eyes. The last citizen was gone, flattened beneath her toe, erased from existence. A moment of perfect, eerie silence. Then the thought returned to her, the reason she had come here in the first place. Gold. She had wanted to gather supplies for home. With a casual flick of her wrist, she tapped the scanner module on her suit. Blue waves of energy pulsed across the ruins, scanning the ground beneath her. After a few seconds, a bright signal blinked on her display, a thick gold vein, hidden beneath the rubble. Without hesitation, she raised her arm, the mining laser already charging. The beam hissed to life, cutting cleanly through stone, asphalt, and twisted rebar. The unwanted debris vaporized, leaving only the golden chunks exposed. She crouched down and carefully gathered the shimmering nuggets, slipping them into the storage compartment of her jetpack. Her purple eyes wandered over the ruins one last time. A faint smile crossed her lips. What a shame, all dead. No more screams, no more minds to invade, no more emotions to savor, only her own. But that was enough, more than enough. She felt something again. Finally, she felt huge, powerful, guilty. With a deep, steady breath, she activated the portal device. A sharp flash of white light split the air, and without a single glance back, Vara stepped through. The searing winds of Vulco greeted her. An endless landscape of volcanoes, bubbling lava streams, and sulfur-thick air. Home. Vara slipped her breathing mask back on and started her trek across the dark, jagged terrain. But the closer she came to her house, the lighter her steps became. She tiptoed across the black stone as silently as a shadow. Her father must not find out she had been away. Once inside, she peeled herself out of the heavy suit and neatly folded it, placing it back in its usual spot. Then, like any other night, she slipped under her blanket, curling up in her small but safe bed. A wide, satisfied grin spread across her face. Yes, she felt guilty. She had wiped out over 5,000 lives, and it felt perfect. She had acted like a monster, but maybe that's exactly what she wanted to be. Maybe that was her true place. People here always saw her as strange, weird, awkward, but on other worlds, out there, she was a force of nature, a walking disaster, So why not embrace her monstrous side? After all, it had done her good. Finally, she had felt something again, and it had been wonderful, so thrilling, so intense, so awesome. Vara closed her eyes, the grin still resting on her lips. It had been a perfect day, and completely exhausted, she drifted off into sleep almost instantly. The next morning, Vara crawled sleepily out of bed, grabbed the gold chunks she had collected, and made her way to the neighboring colony. Lorcani was already waiting. The pink-skinned axolotl woman looked slender, almost delicate, despite her impressive size. Vara placed the heavy gold chunks on the table. For humans, these would have been priceless treasures, massive, tons-heavy lumps of purest gold. But for the two giant axolotl, they looked more like a handful of shiny, pretty pebbles. Lorcani's eyes lit up the moment she saw the glittering haul. "Vara, this is fantastic! Where in the mist did you dig these up?" Vara just shrugged, playing it cool. "From an expedition. The details are my little secret." Lorcani chuckled softly, her delicate claw gliding over the smooth golden surfaces. "Well, as long as you keep bringing more. We always need gold for the computer systems." She placed the last lump back on the table and raised her gaze. "Vara, that was top-notch work. Really impressive." And then, without warning, she wrapped her arms around the smaller Vara in a warm, tight hug. "Keep it up, okay? If I need more, I know exactly where to find you." Vara nodded, feeling a warm, almost childlike pride swell in her chest. She had done something for her colony, something that mattered, even if the price had been thousands of human lives. As she headed off to her shift, the grin slowly returned to her face. One thought kept circling in her mind. She wanted more. More alien worlds, more adventures, more power. Maybe one day she would stomp through another city as a monster. The thought made her heart beat faster. Yes, the next adventure was probably already waiting for her, and she was ready. This was the story First Contact, featuring our original character Vara. We hope you enjoyed this little trip into her world. If you did, give us a like and subscribe to our channel, and feel free to leave a comment with your ideas or suggestions. If you'd like to support our work, check out our Patreon page. Thanks a lot for listening.